The deepest part of night still clung to the desert, a cool, velvet blanket woven with distant stars. Yet, a subtle shift rippled through the slumbering camp. It began not with a harsh cry, but a quiet stirring, a soft clink of metal from the caravan leader's tent, then a low, resonant hum from one of the camel-teers. Sleep, though profound and dreamless after days of tireless travel, was always short. Limbs unknotted themselves from bedding rolls laid directly upon the cool earth, and breath misted in the crisp, pre-dawn air. A hand stretched, finding the worn texture of a felt sleeping mat, then reached for the familiar flask of water, its contents cool and life-giving. The first sips were a quiet ritual, washing away the lingering dryness of the desert night. A low fire, rekindled from embers, offered the faintest glow, casting long, wavering shadows across the waking figures. Breakfast was a quiet affair, a scattering of cold, hard flatbread, dried apricots tasting of concentrated sunshine, and the salty resilience of cured meat. There was little conversation, only the soft sounds of chewing, the rustle of cloth, and the steady breath of men preparing for another day's journey. The air held the faint, earthy scent of damp dust, mingled with the dry, almost medicinal aroma of camel dung that had served as fuel through the night. Soon, the methodical work began. Tents, humble shelters of sturdy canvas and simple poles, were dismantled with practiced grace, their fabric whispering like secrets in the nascent breeze. Bedding rolls were tightly bound, cooking pots cleaned with handfuls of sand, then packed away. The true heart of the morning's labor lay with the beasts of burden. Camels, rousing from their rest, emitted low, guttural rumbles, a sound as ancient as the dunes themselves. Their coarse wool coats, still cool from the night, brushed against hands as the drivers moved amongst them, checking their health, murmuring soft words of encouragement. The rhythmic creak of leather and rope began as saddles were secured, then the careful, meticulous loading of bales, bolts of shimmering silk, fragrant spices in woven bags, bundles of precious tea, and rolls of thick felt. Each load was balanced with an artisan's precision, ensuring no strain on the animal for the long day ahead. The air now thrummed with the anticipation of movement, punctuated by the soft thud of supplies settling into place. As the eastern sky blushed with the first hints of rose and gold, painting the distant horizon with streaks of dawn, the caravan slowly coalesced into a living river. The lead camel, adorned with bells that jingled with a gentle, hypnotic rhythm, lifted its head, its dark eyes gazing into the awakening expanse. The caravan leader, a stoic figure wrapped in layers of protection against sun and sand, gave a quiet signal. With a collective, low grumble, the camels began to rise, unfolding their immense limbs with surprising grace, their massive feet finding purchase on the cool, undisturbed sand. The journey began. Slowly, steadily, the procession stretched out, a moving line of life against the vast, silent canvas of the desert. The early light was still kind, painting the undulations of the landscape in soft amber and sepia tones. The air, though dry, held a refreshing coolness that would soon give way to the day's full heat. The predominant sound was the ceaseless, melodic jingle of camel bells, a percussive accompaniment to the soft, rhythmic padding of hooves on the ancient tracks. It was a sound that settled deep into the bones, a lullaby of perseverance. Merchants, some astride their own mounts, others perched high on laden camels, swayed gently with the rhythm of their beasts. Camel drivers walked beside their charges, their footsteps barely disturbing the dust. Conversation was sparse, reserved for necessary commands or observations. The mind drifted, lulled by the endless horizon and the slow, deliberate pace. Hours unwound, marked only by the sun's gradual ascent, pulling itself higher into an ever-deepening blue. Shadows shortened beneath the camels, becoming mere dark pools directly beneath their bellies. The wind, a constant companion, murmured tales across the sand, sometimes carrying the faint, dry scent of the desert itself, mineral, ancient, unchanging. As midday approached, the air began to shimmer above the distant dunes, hinting at the fierce embrace of the sun that was yet to come. The caravan pressed on, a whisper of life against the vast, unending silence. The afternoon light, having long since mellowed from its midday intensity, now lay across the old wooden floorboards like a vast, spilled honey. It crept, imperceptibly almost, further into the room, tracing the faint dust motes that danced in its golden columns. Each one a tiny, illuminated world, suspended in the quiet air, performing a slow, silent ballet for no audience but the patient gaze that might happen upon it. The air itself felt thick with stillness, a gentle balm that seemed to hush any errant thought before it could fully form. There was a faint scent, too, of sun-warmed wood and something indefinably green, perhaps from the vine that gently tapped against the outer wall, a mere whisper of motion. Beyond the window pane, where the glass held the slight imperfections of an earlier craft, the world offered a muted palette. Greens softened by the haze of late summer, blues faded by the distance of the sky, all blending into a scene that felt less like a specific moment and more like an enduring tableau. A lone bird, small and unassuming, perched on a branch just outside, its silhouette a simple ink blot against the diffused brightness. It made no sound, offered no movement, merely existing in its own quiet contemplation, perfectly mirroring the tranquility within. The distant murmur of the road, usually a low thrum, had softened to an almost imperceptible hum, like a bee lost in a field of clover. It spoke of a world continuing, but at a respectful remove, its usual clamor reduced to a gentle background whisper. Time in this space seemed to stretch and thin, losing its usual urgency. Minutes did not tick by but rather flowed, indistinguishable one from the next, merging into a continuous stream of calm. One could watch a shadow lengthen across the floor for what felt like an eternity, or trace the slow drift of a cloud across the pale sky, finding a profound satisfaction in its unhurried passage. There was no need to rush, no impulse to interrupt the delicate balance of the moment. The very act of breathing felt more deliberate, deeper, as if the lungs themselves were expanding to hold more of this pervasive peace. A slight, almost imperceptible current of air would occasionally stir the thin curtains, causing them to billow inward with a soft sigh before settling back into their stillness. It was a reminder of the world's quiet breath, a gentle pulse that maintained everything in its unhurried rhythm. The light shifted, imperceptibly, from honeyed gold to a softer, warmer amber, deepening the tones of the room, preparing for the slow, inevitable descent into evening. This was not a change to be noted with regret or anticipation, but merely observed as another natural unfolding, another graceful transition in the quiet unfolding of the day. To exist within this segment of time was to dissolve into it, to become one with the quiet hum of existence, the patient dance of light and shadow, the soft breath of the breeze. It was a moment of complete and utter presence, where the past faded into an unremembered distance and the future held no claim. Only the gentle now, stretched out like a silken thread, unbroken and infinitely peaceful. There was a quiet strength in this stillness, a deep well of calm that promised to endure, long after the last sliver of sunlight had receded and the world outside had surrendered to the quiet embrace of the coming night. The last echoes of the day's hurried murmurings had long dissolved, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a presence itself. It was not an empty quiet, but one filled with the soft hum of the world settling, a deep breath taken by the earth. In this space, the air itself seemed to grow denser, softer, cushioning every stray thought that dared to surface. The light, too, had undergone its own gentle transformation. No longer the crisp, assertive clarity of noon, it had mellowed into a tender, diffused glow, painting the edges of the room in hues of pearl and slate. Through the window pane, the garden surrendered to the deepening twilight. Shapes that had been distinct hours before now blurred into an indistinct tapestry of greens and grays. A single, stubborn rose, its petals a muted blush even in the fading light, held a quiet vigil near the ancient stone bench. Its form was less defined now, more an impression of beauty than a detailed rendering. The leaves on the old oak tree, which had rustled with such vivacity in the afternoon breeze, hung motionless, silent sentinels. There was no urgency in this descent into night, only a slow, deliberate folding of the world into itself, a quiet withdrawal. The only sound that dared to interrupt this pervasive calm was the almost imperceptible whisper of the wind sifting through the eaves, a sigh so faint it could have been merely imagined. It was a sound that did not intrude but rather affirmed the stillness, like a subtle underscore to the quietude. One could almost feel the cool breath of the evening seep beneath the window frame, a gentle current against the skin, carrying with it the faint, clean scent of damp earth and the distant, sweet promise of night-blooming jasmine. These were not sensations that demanded attention, but rather ones that invited soft, yielding surrender, a sinking deeper into the moment. Time, in this unhurried expanse, ceased to be a measure and became instead a fabric. Each tick of an unseen clock dissolved into the seamless weave of moments, stretching and flowing without discernible beginning or end. There was no pressure to recall, no impulse to anticipate. The mind simply drifted, an unmoored vessel on a tranquil sea, observing the subtle dance of shadows as they lengthened, crept, consuming the last vestiges of daylight. The room grew dimmer, the outlines of familiar objects softened further, until they were merely suggestions, ghost-like forms in the encroaching gloom. Yet there was no fear in this fading, no sense of loss, but rather a profound sense of completeness. This gentle descent into darkness was a balm, a quiet benediction. It encouraged a different kind of seeing, one that relied less on sight and more on feeling, an intuitive understanding of the world's quiet rhythms. The air grew heavier, not with oppression but with a comforting weight, like a soft blanket drawn over the day. The faint scent of the garden lingered, a subtle reminder of the life that continued its slow, hidden work even through the darkest hours. A sense of profound peace settled, not an absence of trouble, but a quiet acceptance of everything that was, and everything that would gently unfold. The gentle arc of the afternoon sun continued its slow descent, painting the far wall with a deepening hue of soft gold. It was a light that spoke not of urgency, but of a quiet yielding, a subtle surrender to moments. Dust motes, suspended in the still air, became tiny, ephemeral dancers, catching the radiance and briefly shimmering before fading back into the unseen. One could spend an eternity watching them, lost in their unhurried ballet, each speck a fleeting testament to the unnoticed life that drifts around us, a constant, silent presence. There was no need to rush, no call to action, simply an invitation to observe, to breathe, and to allow the gentle rhythm of the space to permeate one's being. The distant hum of the world beyond these walls remained muted, a faint, almost melodic undercurrent that only deepened the pervasive calm within. It was a testament to the way sound can recede when one truly listens, not to categorize, but to feel its texture, its inherent quietness. The silence, then, was not an absence, but a rich, layered presence. This profound stillness offered a sanctuary, a quiet harbor where thoughts, like the dust motes, could drift and settle, finding their own unhurried equilibrium. This deep sense of quietude often brings with it a peculiar clarity, a deepening of perception. One begins to notice the faint scent of old paper from a nearby shelf, the imperceptible coolness of the air as it shifts, the soft, organic creak of old wood settling into its timeless repose. These are not details that clamor for attention, but rather secrets that gently unveil themselves to the patient observer, whispering of continuity and the enduring nature of things. They remind us that beauty often resides in the humble, the overlooked, the elements that simply are, without demanding recognition. To truly immerse oneself in such a moment is to step outside the usual currents of time, to allow the river of minutes and hours to flow past without carrying one along. It is a profound choice, to inhabit fully the delicate, unfolding now. In this gentle dwelling, the ordinary transforms, imbued with a quiet luminescence. A simple breath becomes a profound act, a connection to the very pulse of life. The sensation of one's own presence within the space becomes vivid, yet not overwhelming, a calm acceptance of being. Such moments are not fleeting glimpses of peace, but rather invitations to cultivate a continuous state of receptivity, moving through the world with an open heart and an unhurried mind. They teach us that true strength lies not in striving or conquering, but in the quiet surrender to what is, in the gentle embrace of the present, in the patient observation of light and shadow, and in the deep appreciation for the soft, persistent hum of existence. It is in these unadorned spaces, where time seems to slow, that one can truly hear the subtler melodies of life, the quiet assurances that flow beneath the surface of the everyday, offering solace and an enduring sense of gentle belonging. The afternoon continued its soft farewell, yet the stillness it brought lingered, a promise of peace extending beyond the last glimmer of light. The vast heart of the Han Empire once beat with a quiet curiosity for what lay beyond its western edges. Emperor Wu, his thoughts as boundless as the cloud-streaked sky, yearned to understand the murmurs carried on the wind from the distant, western regions. It was a call not for conquest, but for connection, a whisper across the endless plains, inviting a courageous soul to trace its origin. And from among the calmest and most steadfast, a man named Zhang Qian stepped forward, his resolve a gentle flame against the immense unknown. His departure was not heralded by fanfare, but by the soft pad of camel hooves on sun-baked earth, a quiet slipping away into the hazy horizon. The journey west, an undertaking of immeasurable patience, began under a sky of deepening sapphire, carrying with it a sense of ancient pilgrimage. Days melted into weeks, weeks into seasons, as the expedition drifted across landscapes where the very air seemed to hum with silence. The golden dust of the Gobi desert became their constant companion, sifting gently over their cloaks, settling like a fine powder on their eyelids. The rhythm was slow, hypnotic, the gentle sway of the camels, the steady creak of saddle leather, the distant, murmuring song of the wind across desolate dunes. For 13 years, the world spun around Zhang Qian and his companions as they traversed realms unseen by Han eyes. There were trials, of course, the unforeseen capture by the nomadic Xiongnu, a decade held in quiet observation of a foreign way of life. Yet, even in captivity, his purpose remained a steady beacon, unextinguished by the passage of time or the weight of separation. His spirit, like the desert sage, bent but did not break, absorbing the nuances of new tongues, the subtle shift in customs, the slow unfolding of alien horizons. He watched the stars trace familiar paths across unfamiliar skies, finding comfort in their constancy. When freedom finally came, it was not with a rush, but a slow, cautious continuation of his original quest. He journeyed on, deeper into the west, reaching the lands of Diyuan with their magnificent, sweating horses, and Kangju, where the scent of unfamiliar blossoms drifted on the breeze. He heard tales of even more distant lands, of grapes that yielded ruby wine, of skilled artisans, of cultures vibrant and distinct. He gathered these threads of knowledge, not with hurried urgency, but with the quiet contemplation of a scholar piecing together an ancient scroll. The return journey was as long and arduous as the outward path, yet infused with the quiet joy of knowledge gained. Zhang Qian, though older, carried within him the vastness of the lands he had seen, the wisdom gleaned from endless horizons and quiet observation. He returned to the Han court not with tales of conquest, but of connection, of new goods, new peoples, new possibilities for trade and understanding. His whispers, carried on the gentle currents of the emperor's court, soon became a steady flow. The paths he had traced with such quiet determination became the arteries of the Silk Road, a network upon which goods, ideas, and cultures would slowly, steadily begin their long journey across continents. It was the gentle beginning of an era, a time when merchants, like the wind itself, would carry secrets and wonders from east to west and back again, their sleepy journeys weaving a tapestry of shared human experience across the vast, slumbering heart of the world. The light arrived without fanfare, a pale, washed-out silver at first, creeping over the edge of the world with an almost imperceptible slowness. It did not burst forth or declare its presence with any suddenness, but rather diffused, softening the harsh edges of the room, coaxing shadows into longer, gentler forms. There was a quiet understanding that settled deep within the chest as this soft illumination took hold, a sense of peace that always seemed to accompany the dawn when one was awake enough to truly greet it, rather than simply be roused by its full, blinding insistence. The air itself felt cool, a slight crispness that promised the day would unfold with a refreshing clarity, at least in its initial hours. A mug of tea, now lukewarm, rested in cupped hands, the ceramic a comforting warmth against the skin. Its steam, long vanished, had left only a faint, earthy scent, mingled subtly with the lingering traces of sleep and the clean, understated fragrance of the fresh morning. Each slow, deliberate sip was less about the taste or the temperature and more about the simple act, a grounding ritual that anchored the mind in the present moment. One could almost feel the quiet expansion of time, a generous stretch that allowed thoughts to drift and settle like motes of dust in a sunbeam, observed but not chased. Beyond the window, the world was beginning to stir, not with urgency, but with a similar, unhurried grace. A single bird offered a tentative trill, then another, a practice run before the full chorus would eventually join in. The distant murmur of the river, a constant companion, seemed to deepen its voice just slightly, as if waking up its own internal currents. Trees, still heavy with dew, stood like silent sentinels, their leaves glistening with 1,000 tiny, ephemeral diamonds that would soon evaporate with the sun's gradual ascent. The world breathed, and with each quiet exhalation, a sense of gentle renewal settled over everything. There was no need for grand plans or urgent tasks in these moments. The beauty lay in the unburdened observation, in the permission to simply be, and to allow the mind to wander along the soft, meandering paths of contemplation. Perhaps it was the way the light caught the dust on an old bookshelf, highlighting the texture of worn spines, or the subtle shift in the color of the sky from silver to a nascent rose. Each detail, however small, held a quiet significance, a whisper of the interconnectedness of things. It was a time for reflection not on what had been or what was to come, but on the simple, ongoing present, a quiet acknowledgement of the steady, unwavering flow of existence. This segment of time, suspended between the deep quiet of night and the eventual stirrings of a new day, felt like a precious gift. It was a space where the world slowed its spinning, inviting a deeper connection with the very fabric of being. There was a profound stillness, a gentle rhythm that resonated with the beat of one's own heart, reminding one that peace was not an absence of sound or activity, but a particular quality of presence. It was a quiet morning, unfolding with a delicate slowness, promising nothing more than its own soft beauty, and that, in itself, was more than enough. Segment 2.3. Let us continue to settle, allowing the gentle rhythm of our own breath to guide us deeper into this moment. There is no need to push, no need to strive for anything. Simply allow yourself to be here, exactly as you are. Feel the quiet rise and fall within your chest, a soft wave that moves through you, bringing calm with each inhale and releasing a little more tension with each exhale. Notice the ground beneath you, the support that holds you steadily. Feel the gentle pressure, the secure connection to the earth. Perhaps you can sense the texture of the fabric against your skin, or the temperature of the air as it brushes softly against your face, your hands. These are simple anchors, inviting you to fully arrive in this present space, in this present time. Let your shoulders soften, allow your jaw to release, and feel any tightness in your forehead gently unfurling, like a delicate flower opening to the morning sun. As you rest in this quiet awareness, you may notice thoughts drifting in and out of your mind. Picture them as clouds, high in the vast, clear sky. Some may be light and wispy, barely there. Others may be darker, more substantial, perhaps carrying a whisper of a worry or a memory. Do not try to catch them or to push them away. Simply observe them as they appear, then watch as they continue on their journey across the sky of your awareness. They are not you. You are the sky itself, vast and unchanging, while the clouds are merely passing through. Allow them to come, allow them to go, without judgment, without attachment. Just a gentle observation. In the same way, emotions may arise. Perhaps a feeling of comfort, or a subtle unease. Maybe a trace of joy, or a passing wave of sadness. Like the clouds, emotions too are transient visitors. They arrive, they linger for a while, and then they recede. There is no need to analyze them, no need to cling to them, and no need to resist them. Can you simply make space for them, acknowledging their presence with a kind and open heart? Imagine them as ripples on the surface of a deep, still pond. The ripples appear, they expand, and then they fade back into the stillness of the water. Beneath the ripples, The pond remains calm, vast, and undisturbed. You are that calm, that vastness. Allow your attention to settle back into the gentle pulse of your breath. Feel how it continues, steadily, faithfully, regardless of the thoughts or feelings that pass through. It is a constant anchor, a reminder of your unwavering presence. With each inhale, draw in a sense of quiet peace, a soothing balm for your entire being. With each exhale, release anything that no longer serves you, letting go of any residual tightness, any lingering concerns. Just a soft surrender to the flow. Feel your body becoming softer, more yielding, melting slightly into the support beneath you. Imagine yourself as a leaf floating effortlessly on a calm stream, carried gently by the current, with no effort or resistance. Or perhaps a piece of driftwood, resting peacefully on the shore, worn smooth by the ocean's patient touch. There is no urgency here, nowhere else to be, nothing else to do. Just this quiet moment, this gentle breath, this simple, profound awareness of being. Rest here, in this spaciousness, in this quiet sanctuary within yourself. This is your safe haven, always accessible, always welcoming. Allow this sense of profound stillness to deepen within you, touching every cell of your being. Let it infuse your mind with clarity and your heart with an expansive, tender kindness. You are exactly where you need to be, held in this moment of quiet grace. The last vestiges of the day's light, a soft, honeyed glow, slowly retreated from the room, pulling back like a gentle tide from a quiet shore. It clung longest to the edges of the antique writing desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, tiny galaxies in miniature, before finally surrendering to the encroaching twilight. Elias, seated in the worn armchair by the window, felt the coolness of the glass against his forehead, a faint comfort in the diminishing warmth. The world outside was softening, blurring at its edges, preparing for its nightly slumber. A lone bird, perhaps a robin, offered a final, hesitant trill from the old oak tree just beyond the pane, its melody thin and sweet, then silence. It was a sound that seemed to punctuate the quietude rather than break it. The air within the room was still, carrying only the faintest scent of old paper and dried lavender from a sachet tucked somewhere within the armchair's depths. This was the hour he savored most, the liminal space between the bustling day and the deep stillness of night, a time when thoughts drifted unbidden like leaves on a slow-moving current. He thought of the lake, how it would look now, mirroring the bruised purples and pale oranges of the western sky, its surface rippled only by the occasional, almost imperceptible breath of wind. He remembered the feeling of skipping stones across its glassy expanse as a boy, the satisfying plink-plink-plink as they danced across the water before sinking into the cool depths. Such simple joys, long past, yet still retaining a quiet resonance in the chambers of his memory. They were not memories of grand events or profound insights, but rather of small, fleeting moments, stitched together to form the tapestry of a life lived gently. His gaze drifted to the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, its sepia tones muted by the fading light. It was of his grandmother, sitting on a porch swing, a half-smile playing on her lips, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She had a way of listening, he recalled, that made you feel as though your every word was a precious gift, unfolding slowly for her consideration. She never rushed, never interrupted, just offered a silent, encompassing presence. It was a lesson he had absorbed, perhaps imperfectly, but deeply nonetheless. To truly hear, one must first quiet the noise within oneself. The contours of the room were now indistinct, familiar objects dissolving into shadows. The old grandfather clock in the hall ticked on, its steady rhythm a comforting counterpoint to the silence. Each tick, each talk, a gentle reminder of time's relentless, yet unhurried, passage. It did not rush, it simply continued, marking the moments without judgment or haste. He found solace in this steady procession, a sense of order in a world often prone to chaos. Sometimes, in these quiet moments, a wistfulness would settle over him, not a sharp sorrow, but a soft yearning for something indefinable, something just beyond reach. Perhaps it was the echo of all the lives lived within these walls, all the stories whispered into the silence, now absorbed into the very fabric of the old house. He imagined the faint imprints of laughter, of quiet tears, of shared meals and tender embraces, lingering like a barely perceptible perfume in the air. This house, his sanctuary, felt less like a structure of wood and stone and more like a gentle, living presence, breathing alongside him. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the darkness deepen around him, feeling the subtle shifts in the air, the cooling of the day. The world was preparing for sleep, and so, too, was a part of him. There was a peace in this descent, a quiet acceptance of the turning of the earth, the inevitable cycle of light and shadow. When he opened his eyes again, the first faint stars were pricking through the velvet of the sky, distant beacons, serene and constant. The night had arrived, bringing with it a profound, enveloping quiet. The caravan's pace was a slow, deliberate breath drawn across the vast, slumbering land. Days blurred into a seamless ribbon of ochre and pale gold, marked only by the shifting light of the sun and the quiet rhythm of the camel bells. In such unhurried moments, when the mind was unburdened by the clamor of the marketplace or the urgency of the next negotiation, thoughts had a way of drifting, like fine desert dust caught on a gentle breeze. They settled on things half-remembered, tales whispered around dwindling campfires, or faint echoes from the very ground beneath the weary hooves. One such thought, if one allowed it to linger, concerned a particular place, far from the well-trod paths, nestled in a fold of sun-baked hills that shimmered on the distant horizon like a half-formed dream. Some called it the oasis of quiet stones, though few had ever truly seen it. It was not marked on any merchant's map, existing only in the hazy recollections of a very old few, perhaps those whose fathers or grandfathers had strayed too far, or simply possessed a keener ear for the desert's hushed secrets. It was said that a small community had lived there long, long ago. Not a village of many, but a handful of families, known only as the Murmurers of the Well. Their reputation, as faint as a mirage, was tied to their unique way of life. They were not farmers of great yields, nor weavers of fine silks, but rather, they were known, if known at all, for their unusual silence. Travelers spoke of an uncanny stillness, a soft-spoken existence where even their voices were said to be no louder than the rustle of dry leaves. Their dwellings, it was whispered, were built partly into the earth, their windows like sleepy eyes peering out from beneath the dusty brow of the land. They were said to collect the dew on special cloths at dawn and possessed a curious reverence for certain dark, polished stones found only in their specific oasis. Then one day the Murmurers simply ceased to be. Not through a sudden raid, nor the wrath of a sandstorm, nor even the slow, creeping thirst of a drying well. There were no signs of struggle, no scattered belongings, no desperate flight. Just absence. A handful of adventurous, or perhaps foolhardy, wanderers who sought out the quiet stones decades later found the earthen dwellings standing, though softened by time and wind. The few objects left behind, a ceramic bowl, a worn wooden comb, a curious, smooth stone laid carefully on a low shelf, spoke of quiet lives, quietly laid down. The dew-collecting cloths, if they had ever truly existed, had long since dissolved into dust. The wells still offered their meager bounty, cool and clear, but the silence that now hung over the oasis was not the soft, living hush of the Murmurers. It was the deep, resonant silence of emptiness. One might ponder, as the sun dipped low and painted the endless sky in shades of bruised plum and smoldering embers, what became of them? Did they simply walk away, drawn by some inner calling to an even deeper solitude? Did the desert, in its vast, indifferent embrace, slowly reclaim them, absorbing their quiet breaths until they were no more distinct than the shifting grains of sand? Was it a gentle fading, a collective dream from which they simply chose not to awaken into this bustling world? The questions hung in the warm night air, unanswered, unanswerable. They were not sharp, demanding queries, but soft, persistent echoes, like the murmur of distant wind through unseen ruins. The oasis of quiet stones remained, a forgotten wrinkle in the earth's ancient face, holding its secret close, a secret that merely whispered on the wind, a sleepy tale from a time long, long ago, best left undisturbed and wonderfully, tantalizingly, unresolved. The quiet tapestry, so carefully woven in the moments prior, continued to unfold with an unhurried grace. It was a deepening of the stillness, not a cessation of movement, but rather a profound slowing, allowing each subtle shift to be savored, to be truly felt. The very air in the room seemed to exhale, a gentle release that resonated with the barely perceptible exhalation of the world just beyond the windowpane. Light, which had at first been a hesitant, silvery pallor, began its slow, deliberate transformation. It was no sudden burst, no dramatic unveiling, but rather a gradual enrichment, like a single drop of ochre diffusing through a vast pool of clear water. The edges of the shadows, previously indistinct, softened further, losing their definitive lines to become mere suggestions, ethereal smudges against the wall. Dust motes, caught in these emerging shafts, performed a lazy, unchoreographed dance, tiny specks of the universe caught in a private ballet, visible only to an eye attuned to such gentle revelations. There was no rush in their ascent or descent, only a floating, a drifting, as if gravity itself had decided to take a brief, restorative nap. Sounds, too, were part of this unfolding quietude. They were not absent, for true silence is a rare and often unsettling thing, but rather they were filtered, softened, absorbed into the prevailing calm. The distant murmur of a single bird, perhaps a thrush, was not a call to action but a tender note, a gentle punctuation mark in the vast sentence of the morning. It rose and fell, a wavering thread of sound that barely disturbed the air, yet affirmed the delicate pulse of life continuing its course, unbothered by human timelines or expectations. The softest rustle of leaves from the old oak outside the window, a sound often drowned in the daily clamor, now registered as a whisper, a secret shared between the tree and the wind, audible only to those who leaned in with their whole being. This deepening stillness was not a void, but a fullness. It was the space where thoughts, previously racing, found their natural rhythm, slowing to a contemplative stroll. There was no urgent need to categorize, to analyze, or to solve. Instead, there was a simple, profound acceptance of what was in that very moment. The cool air, brushing gently against the skin, felt like a caress, a reminder of the living, breathing world, a comfort rather than a chill. A faint, almost imperceptible scent, perhaps the memory of rain on damp earth, or the quiet perfume of sleeping blossoms, drifted through the space, a fleeting olfactory poem. In this unhurried unfolding, time itself seemed to stretch, to become elastic. Moments were not ticking by, but expanding, inviting one to inhabit them fully, without reference to past regrets or future anxieties. It was a state of pure presence, where the boundary between observer and observed blurred, where the quiet breath drawn was the breath of the world, and the gentle light falling upon the floor was the light within. The heart felt lighter, less encumbered, beating with a steady, peaceful rhythm that echoed the quiet pulse of the morning. Each gentle shift, each subtle revelation, was a reassurance, a tender confirmation that beauty often resides in the quietest spaces, revealed only to those who choose to wait, and to simply be. This slow, gentle continuum was a profound lesson in the art of living, not as a race to be won, but as a melody to be savored, note by precious note. The quiet held its breath, a fragile, pearlescent shell around the house. Outside, the world was still piecing itself together, detail by soft detail. The earliest light, diffused and modest, had begun to touch the highest branches of the old oak, transforming each budding leaf into a tiny, emerald lamp. It was not a sudden burst, but a gradual suffusion, a patient unfolding that spoke of time unhurried, of moments allowed to ripen in their own accord. The transition from the deep indigo of pre-dawn to this gentle blush was barely perceptible, a whisper on the canvas of the sky. Within the silent room, the air felt cool against the skin, a delicate caress that promised the approaching warmth of the day without yet delivering it. The window pane, still damp with the residual chill of the night, offered a framed tableau of this gentle genesis. One could almost feel the earth stretching, sighing, preparing for its daily performance. There was no urgency in this awakening, only a profound ancient rhythm, as dependable as the turning of the tide, yet infinitely more subtle in its manifestation. It invited a similar slowness from within, a mirroring of the world's quiet ascent. A distant murmur, perhaps a faint wisp of wind rustling through the newly awakened leaves, barely registered. It was less a sound and more a vibration in the deep stillness, a breathy whisper that invited rather than demanded attention. The world outside the glass was a canvas of muted greens and nascent golds, blending seamlessly into the soft haze that still clung to the distant fields. Each blade of grass, each dew-kissed petal, seemed to possess its own quiet luminescence, drawing the gaze inward, not to scrutinize or categorize, but simply to observe, to be present within the quiet unfolding. To sit in such a moment was to shed the layers of hurried thought, to let the mind drift like a leaf upon a slow-moving stream. Worries, anxieties, the insistent demands of the approaching day, all receded to a barely perceptible hum at the edge of consciousness. There was only the breath, steady and deep, and the soft pulse of life outside the window, mirrored by the quiet pulse within. It was a space where the self could dissolve, if only for a few precious moments, into the larger current of being, feeling connected to the very core of things without needing to name or define that connection, finding solace in the nameless flow. The shadows, long and attenuated only moments before, began their slow retreat, surrendering their hold to the advancing light. They softened at the edges, losing their sharp definition, becoming mere suggestions of the forms they had once embraced. This gentle surrender was a lesson in itself, a quiet reminder of impermanence, of the beauty in letting go, of the subtle grace in transition. Every fleeting shift in hue, every slow brightening of the horizon, carried a silent eloquence that resonated deep within the quiet observer. It was a time for receiving, for simply allowing the quiet beauty to seep into the very marrow of one's bones, leaving behind a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that asked for nothing more than to be felt, a tranquil echo lingering long after the sun had fully claimed the sky. The quiet, then, became a texture, something one could almost touch, a soft fleece lining the edges of the air. It wasn't the absence of sound, but rather a gentle hush, a filtering of the world's distant murmur into something almost imperceptible, like the whisper of breath on a cold morning pane. Outside the window, the day was not yet fully awake, or perhaps it was simply choosing a slower, more deliberate unfurling. The sky held a pearlescent quality, a soft, milky sheen that promised light without committing to brilliance. It was the kind of morning where the very act of observing felt like participation, a silent dialogue with the unfolding hours. A tendril of this nascent light began to stretch across the worn wooden floor, a pale, almost hesitant wash that seemed to feel its way, inch by gentle inch. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, transforming them from invisible particles into a galaxy of miniature, twirling stars, each catching and scattering the faint gleam. There was no urgency in its progression, no sudden flood, only this gradual, patient claiming of space. It moved like a breath, like the slow expansion of a bloom, revealing the subtle grain of the wood, the slight scuffs and marks that were the quiet testament to years of quiet living, of footsteps taken and moments passed. To watch this silent procession was to be reminded of how much of life happens in these barely discernible shifts. We often chase the grand revelations, the sudden epiphanies, yet so much profound truth resides in the nuanced, the almost imperceptible. The way a shadow lengthens, just a fraction, marking the sun's climb. The way a quiet thought unfurls itself, not in a burst, but in a gradual, meandering path through the landscape of the mind. These are the gentle currents that carry us, the subtle energies that shape our days, often unnoticed until we pause, truly pause, and attune ourselves to their quiet rhythm. The light reached the antique armchair by the window, caressing the faded velvet, bringing out a deeper, richer hue from its worn surface. It didn't transform the chair into something new, but rather burnished its history, highlighting the places where countless hands had rested, where stories had been read, where quiet contemplation had settled like fine dust. It was an act of gentle revelation, a quiet honoring of what was already there, merely allowing it to be seen more clearly, more tenderly. This soft illumination seemed to bring with it a sense of continuity, a thread weaving through time, connecting the present moment to all the past moments that had unfolded in this same gentle light, under this same patient sky. There was a profound sense of peace in this deliberate slowness, a quiet joy in letting the moment simply be, without demand or expectation. It was a space where the breath deepened without conscious effort, where the shoulders softened, and the mind, usually a restless current, found itself settling into a still, clear pool. In this pause, the world outside, with its distant hum of traffic and its hurried intentions, seemed to recede, leaving only the quiet unfolding within these walls, cradled by the tender light and the profound, comforting hush of the morning. It was a reminder that some of the deepest experiences are not sought, but simply received, arriving on the softest of whispers, in the most gradual of unveilings. While the merchant's day dawned with the sharp clang of a caravan bell and the acrid scent of camel, the morning in Lady Lee's chambers unfolded with a deliberate, soft hush. Sunlight, filtered through layers of silk and lattice screens, painted the polished floorboards with shifting patterns, never quite bright enough to jar the senses. Her attendants moved with a practiced quietude, their footsteps no more than whispers on the rush mats. The air, undisturbed by dust or a traveler's exhalation, carried the faint, sweet perfume of drying osmanthus and the deeper, grounding notes of a rare incense stick smoldering in a bronze censer. The purpose of this meticulous environment was not simply comfort, but the careful cultivation of a state of mind, one perfectly attuned to the delicate balance of porcelain and the nuanced brushstroke. Lady Lee's awakening was not a sudden event, but a gradual surfacing from sleep, guided by the gentle press of a warm, damp cloth to her brow, then a cool, fragrant one. The day's first decisions involved the precise layering of her garments, a fine silk underrobe of pale celadone, a flowing outer tunic of woven peach, chosen not for the day's journey, but for its harmony with the morning's light and the intended mood. Her hair, glossy and black, was tended with slow, deliberate care, each strand a part of an intricate landscape of pins and combs, a small, weighty crown that would require a servant's steady hand for its placement. It was a process that could consume an hour, a quiet dedication to personal equilibrium, a preparation for the day's refined stillness rather than its challenges. Breakfast was a meditation on texture and subtle flavor, a bowl of silken rice porridge, warm and unassuming, accompanied by slivers of candied ginger and tiny, perfectly peeled lychees. The porcelain bowl, thin as a breath, rested lightly in her hand. There was no hurried consumption, no thought of sustenance for arduous miles ahead. The concern, if one arose, might be the temperature of the tea, a faint coolness that hinted at a slight lapse in the kitchen's attentiveness, rather than the more pressing matter of a dwindling water skin or the threat of a looming sandstorm that could obliterate a week's profit. The hours of midday drifted past like the slow progress of a painted boat on a still pond. Lady Lee might spend a serene afternoon observing the play of light on a newly acquired jade carving, its cool surface offering a quiet reassurance of permanence in a world that, outside her walls, was in constant, dusty motion. Or she might supervise the careful arrangement of plum blossoms in a ceramic vase, the placement of each fragile branch a matter of profound aesthetic debate, a ritual requiring absolute focus on ephemeral beauty. The discussions that sometimes punctuated these quiet pursuits were often about the precise nuance of a poetic verse, the history of a particular scroll, or the subtle social implications of a guest's recent acquisition. These were the gentle currents that stirred the surface of her days, vastly different from the bracing winds and stark realities that shaped the existence of those who carried the world's silks and spices across vast, indifferent landscapes. As dusk softened the edges of the courtyard, bringing with it the distant, muted sounds of the city, Lady Lee would take her quiet evening meal, perhaps a delicately steamed fish and crisp greens, served with the same understated precision. The greatest challenge of her day might have been a minor discord in the zither music played in a neighboring pavilion, or the quiet melancholy inspired by a particularly poignant line of poetry. Her journey, unlike those whose lives were carved by the rugged paths of commerce, was an inward one, navigated by the fine distinctions of beauty and decorum, sheltered within walls that kept the grit of the world, and its grander, simpler struggles, comfortably at bay. Her existence was a testament to the quiet power of cultivation, A life lived entirely on the polished surface of things. Segment 4.2. The light, as it always did at this particular hour, began its slow journey across the worn wooden floorboards. It was a subtle shift, almost imperceptible if one were not paying close attention, yet profound in its quiet declaration of the passing moment. A thin, amber band first kissed the threshold of the study, then widened, revealing the faint dust motes dancing in its embrace, each particle a tiny world caught in the current of the sun's gentle tide. There was no rush in this unveiling, no urgency, only a deliberate, unhurried progression that invited the mind to slow its own internal cadence, to match the languid rhythm of the world outside. This daily ritual of light, painting and repainting the familiar contours of the room, held a peculiar solace. It spoke of continuity, of a quiet persistence that defied the fleeting nature of other things. The books lining the shelves, the smooth, cool surface of the writing desk, the very air itself, all seemed to participate in this gentle unfolding, breathing with a collective, unhurried sigh. One could almost feel the subtle vibration of time itself, not as a relentless march forward, but as a deep, resonant hum, a presence rather than a progression. It was in moments such as these that the distinction between waiting and being utterly dissolved, leaving behind only the profound peace of simply existing. A stray breeze, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant, blooming jasmine, whispered through the slightly ajar window, rustling the sheer curtain with a sound like brushed silk. It was a reminder that even in profound stillness, life pulsed with an undeniable, yet tender, vitality. The world did not cease its turning simply because one chose to pause. Rather, the pause allowed a deeper appreciation of its ceaseless, elegant motion. To truly observe was to merge with this flow, to become a part of the very fabric of the moment, rather than an observer standing apart. This kind of attention, unforced and open, was a practice in itself. It was a conscious shedding of the habitual layers of anticipation and expectation, allowing the present to fully unfurl without interference. There was no need to name, to categorize, or to analyze, only to receive. In receiving, one discovered a richness that often eluded a more active, striving mind. The simple warmth of the sun on the skin, the delicate tracery of shadow on the wall, the distant, faint sound of a bird's call, each element contributed to a tapestry woven with threads of quiet joy. Such moments were not about finding answers, but about deepening the questions themselves, allowing them to soften and expand into the vastness of quiet contemplation. They offered no grand revelations, but instead a gentle affirmation of the inherent beauty in the ordinary, in the transient dance of light and shadow, in the slow, patient breath of the world. It was a space where the edges of thought blurred, and intuition began to hum softly beneath the surface of awareness, a quiet wellspring of understanding that required no words. To linger here, in this luminous drift, was to touch something ancient and enduring. It was akin to tracing the grain of a finely aged piece of wood, feeling the history embedded within its patterns, or listening to the silent growth of a plant, understanding its unhurried ascent. This stillness was not an absence, but a fullness, brimming with the quiet presence of all that simply is. It was a gentle invitation to remember that true nourishment often arrives not in a rush, but in the tender, unhurried unfolding of each successive moment, much like the patient spreading of light across a floor. The journey continued, not with bold strides, but with the quiet, persistent grace of a sunrise, always there, always arriving. The last slivers of afternoon light, stretched thin and pale, clung to the uppermost branches of the old oak that stood sentinel at the garden's edge. They painted the deepest greens of its leaves with a transient, bruised violet, a color that seemed to whisper of secrets only twilight truly understood. Below, the garden was already receding into shadow, a tapestry of muted hues where earlier the sun had splashed vibrant strokes. The riotous colors of day, the eager reds and yellows, had softened into a contemplative quiet, a gentle surrender to the approaching hush. A coolness, subtle and invigorating, began to seep through the open window, carrying with it the undeniable scent of damp earth, recently turned by a gentle rain, and something indefinably sweet. It was perhaps the night-blooming jasmine, a modest vine that twined around the trellis by the eastern wall, holding its most potent fragrance for these unhurried hours. From somewhere far off, the faint, almost imperceptible call of an owl, a sound as soft as falling dust, settled into the quiet air, a punctuation mark in the deepening stillness. There was a peculiar solace in this daily transition, a slipping away from the day's bright demands into the embracing arms of twilight's hush. Each day, this quiet ritual unfolded, a gentle surrender to the inevitable, and with it, a gentle release for the observer. It was in these moments that the hurried tempo of the world outside seemed to recede, leaving only the rhythm of one's own breath, slow and steady, a comforting beat against the fading light. The very air around seemed to thicken with peace, holding time in a delicate, unhurried suspension. The thoughts that arose were not urgent, not demanding. They were like the slow, widening ripples on a perfectly still pond after a tiny pebble has dropped, spreading softly, quietly, then fading back into the smooth, reflective surface. Perhaps a forgotten memory would surface, a smile from long ago, or a fragment of a melody hummed softly to oneself in childhood. Nothing that required holding on to, merely observing its graceful passage, acknowledging its presence, and allowing it to dissolve back into the vast, calm expanse of the mind. The old house itself seemed to breathe alongside me, its ancient timbers sighing faintly as the temperature shifted, its very walls imbued with the countless quiet moments it had sheltered across generations. The silence within was not empty, but full, resonating with the echoes of lives lived, of whispered conversations and gentle laughter, of the turning pages of forgotten books. It was a silence that held history, not as a burden, but as a soft, comforting presence, like the warmth radiating from old stone after a day in the sun. Outside, a single, hesitant star pricked the deepening blue, then another, and another, like tiny pinholes appearing in a vast, dark curtain. The world was dimming, yes, but not disappearing. It was merely transforming, inviting a different kind of sight, an inner gaze that found light and meaning not in external brilliance, but in the subtle nuances of shadow and the quiet, profound wisdom of stillness. This was not an end of things, but rather a quiet turning, a pause before the deeper slumber of night. It was a space for reflection, not of what had been gained or lost, but of the simple act of being here, now, in this gentle interlude. The cool air, the distant call, the scent of jasmine, the emerging stars, all wove together into a profound sense of continuity, a quiet promise that even in the deepest darkness, the gentle, slow rhythm of life would persist, holding the certainty of another quiet dawn. The soft descent of the day continued, a silent unfurling of quietude that seemed to absorb the last vestiges of the sun's warmth from the air. Where moments before a vibrant glow had painted the western sky, now only a muted palette remained, shades of lavender and dove-gray bleeding softly into the deep sapphire of the impending night. It was a transition less like an ending and more like a gentle settling, an invitation to lower one's gaze and turn inward, allowing the subtle transformation to wash over the senses. The world outside softened its edges with the fading light. Distant sounds, once distinct in the sharper clarity of noon, began to blur, becoming part of a larger, indistinct hum. The rustle of leaves, no longer agitated by the day's breezy sighs, settled into a faint whisper, a mere suggestion of movement, as if the trees themselves were preparing for a long, quiet rest. The scents, too, grew more profound in the cooler air, the earthy dampness from the soil, the faint, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine just beginning to unfurl its petals, a ghost of wood smoke from a distant chimney. It was as if the very atmosphere was drawing a deep breath, preparing for a long, peaceful exhalation. With the deepening twilight, the familiar landmarks of the day took on new, mysterious forms. Trees became dark, intricate silhouettes against the paling sky, their branches reaching like the slow, deliberate tendrils of thought. Buildings lost their sharp angles, their hard lines dissolving into shadowy masses, reminding us that even the most solid of creations yield to the gentle hand of dusk. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, tiny pinpricks of light began to appear in the vast canvas above. One, then two, then a scattering, until the velvet expanse was dusted with the infinite sparkle of distant suns, each a quiet reminder of cosmic scale and our humble, luminous place within it. This surrender to the night was not a retreat into darkness, but an opening into a different kind of light, one born of introspection and the quiet hum of existence. It was a time when the hurried conversations of the day gave way to the unspoken dialogue within oneself. Worries, like the fleeting shadows of twilight, began to lengthen and then dissolve, losing their urgency in the face of such profound stillness. Here, in the embrace of the fading day, one could feel the quiet pulse of life, the steady rhythm that continues beneath the surface of all activity, a deep current of peace waiting to be accessed, a timeless wellspring of calm. There was a profound comfort in this nightly ritual, a timeless reassurance that even as one chapter closed, another, equally essential, began. It was a moment to release the day's grip, to let go of its demands and its triumphs, to simply be. To breathe deeply the cool, night-scented air and feel the quiet strength that accumulates in the absence of striving. The world, in its gentle turning, offered this sanctuary each evening, a soft pillow for the weary mind, preparing it not for sleep alone, but for a deeper, more restorative kind of awareness that only the quietude of the night can truly bring, a gentle unfolding of the spirit. And so, our tale drifts to a close, much like the final caravan fading into the twilight. It's a world so different, yet so strangely familiar, isn't it? Those ancient paths, once etched by the patient steps of camels and creaking carts, still whisper tales to the wind. Today, we cross continents in the blink of an eye, the hum of engines replacing the rhythmic jingle of bells, the blink of a screen replacing days of travel. Yet, the fundamental desire to share, to understand, to exchange a piece of ourselves for a fragment of another's world, that endures. The vast, silent deserts and endless oceans that once held cultures apart, now simply connect us faster. The spirit of the solitary trader, seeking common ground across unfamiliar sands, echoes in every click of a global market. The same moon that guided their journeys still casts its silver light upon our hurried nights. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, for listening to the echoes of distant lands. If this story resonated with you, a quiet nod of approval with a like would be wonderful. Perhaps subscribe to hear more tales, and do leave a comment below with your thoughts. I always cherish them. Until we meet again, may your own paths be gentle, your burdens light. Rest well, dear friend. Dream gently of sun-drenched horizons and the quiet wisdom of ancient ways. And know that the threads connecting us are stronger than any distance.